Dalai Lama, an open heart. I know it's back to front. I'll be recording now. After empathy and developing closeness, the next important practice in our cultivation of compassion is an insight into the nature of suffering. Our compassion for all sentient beings must stem from a recognition of their suffering. One thing very specific to the contemplation of suffering is that it tends to be more powerful and effective if we focus on our own suffering and then extend it to that recognition to the suffering of others. Our compassion for others grows as our recognition of their suffering does. Okay, so we all know this. Your partner says, I've got the cold, and you think, it can't be that bad, it's just a cold. And then you get it, and then you're like, oh, fuck me, that was awful. And then after that, you have a bit more compassion for them. So it's that simple, across the board. That's what that means. Pardon me. We all naturally sympathise with someone who is undergoing manifest suffering of a painful illness or the loss of a loved one. Sorry, I should just shut up. This is one kind of suffering in Buddhism called the suffering of suffering. Wow, the suffering of suffering. We all naturally sympathise with somebody who is undergoing the manifest suffering of a painful illness or the loss of a loved one. This is one kind of suffering in Buddhism called the suffering of suffering. It is more difficult to feel compassion for someone experiencing what Buddha refers to as the suffering of change, which in conventional terms would be a pleasurable experience, such as the enjoyment of fame and wealth. This is a second kind of suffering. When we see people enjoying such worldly success, instead of feeling compassion, because we know that it will eventually end, leaving them to experience disappointment at their loss, often our reaction is to feel admiration and sometimes even envy. If we had a genuine understanding of the suffering and its nature, we would recognise how the experience of fame and wealth are temporary and how the pleasure they bring will naturally end, causing one to suffer. Yeah, so it can feel a bit depressing, kind of Buddhism. Everything's about suffering. This is the suffering bit of it, though, right? It's a necessary evil. You have to start seeing through things. There is also a third and more profound level of suffering, which is the most subtle. We experience this suffering constantly, as it is the byproduct of cyclic existence. It is in the nature of cyclic existence that we are continuously under the control of negative emotions and thoughts. And as long as we are under their control, our very existence is a form of suffering. This level of suffering pervades our lives, sending us round and round in vicious circles of negative emotions and non-virtuous actions. However, this form of suffering is difficult to recognise. It is not evident. It's not the evident state of misery we find in the suffering of suffering, nor is it in the opposite of our fortune and well-being, as we see in the suffering of change. Nevertheless, this pervasive suffering is most profound. It permeates all aspects of life. Cyclic existence. So if we take that, distill that from lifetimes of cyclic existence, we pull it right out to the cyclic nature of our mind, to the cyclic behaviour patterns that we have, that we don't necessarily notice. It's like unconscious. Once we have cultivated a profound understanding of the three levels of suffering in our own personal experience, the suffering of suffering, I'm feeling like shit. What was the other one called? Can't remember what it's called now. Manifest suffering of that's that one. More difficult passion is change, the suffering of change. Suffering of change is that even if someone looks happy or feels happy, or even as we feel content and happy, then there is a chance where, like, for example, I'm guessing, people who didn't like people who want benefits, who now are on benefits because of the pandemic. Okay, so I get that. And now the more pervasive suffering of unconscious suffering, which I get on a gross level, which is my cyclic behaviours, and apparently, because I don't know about lifetimes, this whole thing throws me back into another rebirth as far as Buddhists are concerned. But I don't know about that yet. Once we have cultivated a profound understanding of the 3 levels of suffering in our own personal experience, it is easier to shift the focus onto others and reflect upon these 3 levels. From there, we can develop the wish that they be freed from all suffering. That's actually my direct experience. Because my own suffering seems to be so pervasive, it becomes overwhelming. It's easier for me to feel compassion for other people than to focus on myself. Once we are able to combine a feeling of empathy for others with a profound understanding of the suffering they experience, we become able to generate genuine compassion for them. We must work at this continually. We can compare this process to the way in which we start a fire by rubbing 2 sticks together. To get to the smouldering point, we know that we must maintain a continuous friction to ratchet up the temperature to the point where the wood can catch fire. Similarly, as we work at developing mental qualities such as compassion, we must diligently apply the mental techniques necessary to bring about the desired effect. Going about this in a haphazard way is of no real benefit. Well, I guess we'll just have to find out about that, because we can only really go at it in our own way. Well, I say that, but we're supposed to be taking advice, aren't we? So maybe that's just my stubborn nature. Just as compassion is the wish that all sentient beings be free from suffering, this is loving kindness we're doing now, sorry. So we've gone, haphazard way is of no real benefit. Stop. Then there's loving kindness. Just as compassion is the wish that all sentient beings be free from suffering, loving kindness is the wish that all may enjoy happiness. As with compassion, when cultivating loving kindness, it is important to start by taking a specific individual as a focus of our meditation, and then we extend the scope of our concern further and further to eventually encompass and embrace all sentient beings. Again, we begin by taking a neutral person, a person who inspires no strong feelings in us, as our object of meditation. Then we extend this meditation to individual friends and family members, and ultimately our particular enemies. We must use a real individual as a focus of our meditation. We must use a real individual as the focus of our meditation. And then enhance our compassion and loving kindness towards that person, so that we can really experience compassion and loving kindness towards others. We work on one person at a time. Otherwise, we might end up meditating on compassion towards all in a very generalized sense, with no specific focus or power to our meditation. Then, when we actually relate this kind of meditation to specific individuals we are not fond of, we might even think, oh, he is an exception. There is no exceptions. Okay, so the big advice is find a neutral person, someone you either don't feel any particular love for or any particular anger towards, who inspires no real strong feelings in us, a stranger, maybe even a celebrity, and we try and find their kindness and their suffering, and then we extend this meditation to people we know who we find easier to understand, and then we stretch it even further to our enemies. Right, so I'm leaving that there. We'll do chapter 8, meditating on compassion. We're just over halfway. Okay.